So yes, welcome. We've actually spent a little time out there sorting out the difference between Olympic lifting and powerlifting. So any questions? You can direct to Tim now, actually. Thanks, genuinely, thanks for coming. You are a busy man, and for giving up your time. I keep coming back to this, listening to all the speakers here and to people I've had conversations with here. This challenge of where we are at the moment in terms of people waking up. There is, I would say, real acceptance now in the mainstream that we are having a big, we as a human beings, our species, are having a big impact on the planet. And what's really interesting to me is how people have, in this room, yourself very much so, have been able to take an idea and make it real. And to use your words, you took an idea of a site that looked like the end of the world and turned it into a symbol of hope. Well, that was the idea anyway, right? So I would love if you could cast your mind back to, was there a moment in time when you had this idea of the Eden Project before it ever became real? When did it begin in your mind?
Well, the truth is that the Eden Project is in everybody's mind. I think there's a tendency, we like to heroise people because that's the age we live in. But every 12-year-old I have ever met has invented an Eden Project or built an amazing Mad Ludwig castle or a dam. That's what we do. That's why we're Homo sap sap. And I think the only thing that I'm, if you like, can be vaguely accused of being visionary about is that I believe that in an age when civil servants were trained professionally to only use the word no, was how to persuade them to say yes. And I discovered how to make people say yes, which is fear of death. Sorry, I don't mean that I threatened them. What I mean by that is that a lot of people deal with public servants as if they were institutionalized, like Brighton through rock. But I remember from my days in the music industry that the person who was in for the most flack ever was the guy who turned down the Beatles because he said that guitar bands weren't going to catch on. So I basically played on this terminal insecurity. I would say, are you going to tell your grandchildren that you turned us down? And it's amazing because it plays on people. It's not an immediate yes. It's kind of like it sort of permeates, it seeps through, and then they hear rumours that other people might say yes. Then it's terrifying. Because if they were right and you were wrong, then you'd be a real schmuck. Whereas if everybody was saying no, you're always going to be right 99% of the time to say no, aren't you? So you've got to hold out the possibility that some people that they like are going to say yes and that they'll be left on their own. Because we're actually quite herd-like creatures, aren't we? So in fact, the comfort of making the wrong decision but all together is wonderful. And I think that actually teaches you quite a lot about politics. Where was I going? But one of the reasons why I was delighted to accept the invitation to come here is that I think it's really, really important that we lose this heroising aspect in our society because, in fact, Eden was built, just like the Lost Gardens of Helligan were developed, by creating a kind of atmosphere of adventure which belonged to everybody. So what happens is I now get massively overrated as being the founder of the Eden Project, the hero who saw the Lost Gardens of Helligan. But actually it was a whole bunch of people all together. It's just because the media is lazy and they always like one name. And it always starts, Tim Smit, age whatever I am, father of 3 or 4, whatever, No, I mean, sorry. Sorry, that sounded rather casual, didn't it? I didn't mean it to come across like that, but you know what I mean. And I think the real excitement of the time that we're living in is that the skills that are required are not taught at any university. They're just not. And it is really underrated, but the power of being able to be depoliticized and to tell a story that is about being really fun and an adventure. We all carry a little seed of loneliness inside each of us. Each of us has a hope of a great adventure in our lives. And when you haven't got one on the horizon, there's that kind of seed which you just wish there was one. So if you can create a really big stage where lots and lots of people can have the spotlight put on them, there's almost nothing that isn't possible. Because actually, the other thing is money. Everybody talks about money being a problem. I know Eden cost a lot of money, but strangely it cost an awful lot of money because the whole structure of getting the state involved to do things, they're so anxious that they will only pay you far too much. How do I phrase this accurately? They pay you far too much so that they as civil servants will not be found wanting through your incompetence. Therefore, the fact that I was able to build a really large car park, environmentally friendly car park, at Helligan for about £30,000, I wasn't allowed to build a really affordable, environmentally friendly car park by our civil servants who were doing Eden. It had to cost 1.5 million. It had to have leaks, it had to have drips, it had to have the ability to catch oil, it had to enable dancing lessons for hedgehogs. It had to do everything. You know, it was extraordinary. But that is actually how society is in Britain, because the civil servants are so anxious about making mistakes that they would much rather spend huge amounts of taxpayers' money getting someone else, one of the big four accountancy companies, to say that it's okay, than actually getting really good value for money. It's a very strange world we live in. But the main point I'm trying to make is the reason why I like to talk to, like this at-home team here, is for people not to heroise the idea of doing really big things, because really big things are actually done and are really cool when you get a whole bunch of people doing something together. Because once you get 3 or 4 people who believe that something is possible, there is an electricity, there is something, I can't put a word on it, but there is something that happens. The body language of the people changes, and the other vital thing is stop using the word if. I've discovered in my life, if you use the word when, after about 3 months, everybody assumes it's inevitable. And that's actually quite helpful. It just means there's a little break at the moment, but when it's built, it'll all come right, and that's what happens.
Right, well, it's absolutely not answered my question at all.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry, don't be sorry. It's even better than the answer I thought I was going to get. I mean, what I'm hearing, though, is there's like an understanding of what makes people tick and how to maneuver through a world that is bogged down, maybe with insecurities, fears, as you say, this great fear. Of getting things wrong. And is that something that, I guess my question is, because I'm off script now because he is, my question, you know, just listening to what you're saying is how do you learn that? Or is that intuitive? I mean, where did you pick that up?
Okay, the truth is, I picked it up when I kicked a man very hard on a football pitch outside the Windmill pub in Clapham, and I was on the dole and I was attempting to be in the music industry, and I hurt him, and someone said to me, "For fuck's sake, do you know who you've just kicked?" And I said, "No idea." He said, "That guy is the lead sound engineer at Abbey Road." And I went, "Hello." And I lifted him up. And anyway, we would then become great friends, and I ended up recording at Abbey Road when I went into the music industry. And I learnt, because when I got the first deal at Abbey Road, recording for nothing, when we got a contract, the CBS, my now ex-wife, said to me, "If this is going to be successful, photocopy the contract you have and give a copy of it to every single person who has played on the record and the owner of the studio," which was EMI. Never ever allow distrust to enter your relationship when someone has been generous in the start. And that became the mantra for my life. I realized something really important about trust, that if you are trustworthy, if you then fail later on, people will still pick you up. But if you're dodgy, when you fall, no one picks you up. And actually starting relationships based on trust, most of the relationships I have are not contractual, they're on handshakes, and I have been disappointed occasionally, very rarely though, compared to the times and the good times. And I think that is often, there are a lot of people who have the profession of making us distrust each other, that then will tell us that we're taking a terrible risk by not having done something like spend a lot of money on lawyers to then irritate everybody. It is really interesting. There's a whole profession that is set up to make us all feel insecure in what is the natural human relation of trusting somebody. Because why would you wish to work with somebody if you didn't trust them? See what I mean? It's a really weird thing. And I think I've only been disappointed, I think probably twice at most in my life with those sort of relationships. But that was the big thing for me, was understanding that be trustworthy, And you will suddenly find that people will offer stuff that you never expect. I mean, with Heligan, if you go around Heligan, it must have cost, I don't know, £300,000–400,000 to restore Heligan. If the National Trust had done it, it would have been 30 million. But all of the wrought ironwork you see at Heligan was given to me by people who visited Heligan, saw we didn't have any, and said, about 30 years ago, my granddad rescued some from a place in Shropshire, would you like it? And then they'd drive it down. I want you to think about that for a moment. When people talk about money, in the garages, attics, and brains of people around this country are hundreds of billions of pounds worth of wealth. You can unlock that wealth if you have two things. One is you're trustworthy, and the second is you have a really good idea. Because money and enthusiasm will follow a good idea. And if no one is following it, the problem is your mates won't tell you that you've got a crap idea. One of the kindest things you can do to somebody who's obsessive, who for 30 years has wanted to do something and still hasn't been successful, is to take them aside and say, do you realise this is really crap? You have hit new benchmarks for low. No, you may think that is a cruel thing to say, but it's an incredible liberation. After they've stopped crying, it's a tremendous liberation to realise, well, maybe I should move on and do something else. And it's a real joy when what they then do is successful. Because if it isn't successful, you feel very guilty. Where was I? I can't remember.
This is good, this is good.
So,
Trust.
Trust, and something also they don't teach you in business school, good manners. Good manners. I mean, unbelievable how rude people are. You know, people say, you know, there are a number of things I would say about this, is that if you want to work with people in the future, do you know how rude it is to go and see them at the moment you need them? It's really uncool. What's cool is to know that in the future you might need to work with someone. Start getting to know them. I get into such trouble at work where people say, why are you seeing these people? This doesn't look like a priority. And I'm saying, it's a priority in 3 years' time. And I'm not joking. It really isn't. It's amazing, that sense, like, you know that childhood dream of playing, what is it, not chess, checkers. You know, when you dream, it's never happened to me, but you know that one where suddenly someone makes a mistake and you go ding, 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 and you get all of the checkers. I think making a great plan come together is through actually having imagined all the steps, and then you work backwards. So that's another thing which I think is really important for all of you who are trying to plan big projects. A lot of people make the mistake of starting at A. Yeah, let's plan. By the time you get to Z, you forget what you were doing, why you were doing it. Always start, well, I can only speak personally, always start with what absolutely effing great looked like. You were successful, it's there. What did it look like? Now get yourself a pen and write backwards from perfection all the steps you needed to take to get there. That's possibly the most valuable thing I can tell you, because so many people make the mistake of planning to go from A to Z. And that's a mistake. You should start at Z, or else you'll make your benchmark far too low and you'll be average. It's the same thing if you were to ask me the best decision I ever made at the Eden Project was, when we didn't have enough money, should we cut it a little bit the whole way round, so that it was very British, we make it a bit smaller. I just said, who the fuck wants to come to the second biggest greenhouse in the world? Yeah? No, seriously. So we cut an entire greenhouse out so we could have the biggest in the world. Because if you've got the biggest in the world, people will come, and when they come, they pay, and when they pay, you've got money, which means that you might be able to save up to then build another one. But if no one's coming in the first place, you're a loser. Aren't you? True. It's true.
I don't know, I mean, Tim arrived about, what, half an hour ago? Something like that. Yeah, something like that. I'm timekeeper today for some reason. The only reason why I say that is I think it's there's this kind of, you know, this theme that's been emerging through the day. We started off talking about kindness, about you know, being good, you know, having good manners. Maybe it's the word that you used. Trust, though, that's an interesting one, because trust, I guess, in its simplest form is someone is going to do what they say they're going to do. or something that you think is going to happen in the future actually happens the way you thought. So I'm going to try and steer this back seamlessly back to the Eden Project and ask about how trust played a role in creating what you created, or you and your team. And I do acknowledge that, what you said about not heroizing, but how, you know, were there moments where you maybe trust, faith, lost that thread? There were moments where you thought you weren't going to get to that image behind you?
I could lie and say, yeah, there were loads of moments of deep insecurity where I worried about my very being. But it's not true. No, there was one moment, and one moment alone, where looking at what is the visitor centre of the Eden Project, it hadn't been built yet, and the hillside started to bleed. This red ochreous liquid started to permeate out of the clay, and then it became a torrent, and then there was the whisper, the sound. It's like a whisper of a landslide as the whole thing just piled over into the bottom of the pit. 1.5 million tons of crap. At that moment, I had an anxiety. No, but I was standing next to a guy who had come out of retirement for McAlpines, simply because he wanted to tell his grandchildren that he'd worked on this amazing project. And this guy had built nuclear power stations, roads, you know, dams, everything. And he said to me in an impeccable Irish voice, he says, "Do you trust me, Tim?" And I went, "Yeah." And then what happened was bliss. He had the 60 shortest phone calls I've ever heard, and they went like this. "Hello, it's me, Jerry. You know where the fuck I am. Get here now." And over the next 3 days, I don't know whether any of you have seen the movie Con Air, but over the next 3 days, guys that made the people in Con Air look like wusses turned up on our site, you know, big metal earrings, tattoos right up over half the face, hair everywhere, and they started to produce the most brilliant industrial industrial choreography you've ever seen. They got on board all these machines, and they were like, it was like a dance, and they rebuilt the hillside in just 6 weeks, working 24/7. They were amazing, absolutely amazing. But they had a lot of testosterone, I have to tell you. I mean, there was one guy who was particularly wild who thought that he had a real big earth mover, and he felt that using the brakes, he felt that using brakes was effeminate. And he was working with a drop of 180 feet, right? But he thought the way to handle the dozer was to push this stuff into the pit, and just as the dozer blade was coming over the drop, to hit the gear stick with his elbow. Unbelievable, double D clutching with attitude, I felt. But anyway, in that 3 months, we only lost one. It was amazing, just straight over, boof, you know. So I ought to add, he survived, he was fine. But it was fantastically exciting. And one of the things is, because I don't know about you guys, you're probably all very good at sort of construction, but I mean, you look like constructors to me. You know. No, but there is an utter nobility in being with people who actually make things. And after Eden was built, the thing that I really wanted to talk about was, do you know how amazing the foundations are? No, honestly. We live in Cornwall, and you've got grade 1 granite is rock hard. That's the hardest rock you can get. Grade 2 is it's friable. Grade 3 is clay that you can mould into something. Grade 4 is gloop, bouncy gloop, right? So our foundations at Eden are just under 1 mile long. Get how long that is. But no one stretch of it is longer than 10 meters. And some of it is in grade 1 granite, and some of it is built on gloop. But when the foundations were finished, before the top bit went on, the tolerance for settling was just 20 millimeters. And you know how much it had settled? 8. I mean, that is unbelievable. It makes you really optimistic about what humans are capable of, and you feel, why can't people talk about how brilliant we are? Because we are just brilliant. Humans are sensational creatures. And we get very depressed because we have to. I hope you realise that the Daily Mail was put on Earth in order to depress us. No, I'm absolutely serious. Because life is so safe, we believe, our species believes, that if we get too smug, we'll just die out. So we've got to make up danger. My mum, just before she died, really believed there was a gang of crack dealers at the end of her lane. She lives in leafy Camberley. But it's important that she was scared occasionally. It's gone a bit far, I know. But the fitness training by actually believing that things could be awful is actually too loud, because we forget how absolutely miraculous we are. Miraculous. And together we are unbelievably cool. And also, sorry, while I'm ranting, don't trust people who say, let's do this for our children. Distrust totally people who say, let's do it for our children's children. I have noticed that all the people who use those phrases are people who just can't get around to doing it now. Really, really, do it now. And if you want to really do something for the future and have a great gang, forget kids. Find people over the age of 50 who are looking at the void of despair. Find people who believe that adventures have passed them by and they will die without ever tasting the fruits of marvelousness. Give them one shot at stardom. It's like Rocky Balboa, but with attitude. All the people who shaped Eden, all the people who shaped Heligan were over 50, and they mentored people who were much younger. The head gardeners, horticultural directors, at Eden were 67 and 69 respectively when I asked them whether they would take on the job. They said, no, we are past our sell-by dates. And I said, can we do a deal? If I can find you business class tickets to go somewhere really exotic for a conference, and you still find yourself drinking at midnight, and realizing that you're still pretty cool, would you then take the job? And I said, well, it's never going to happen. As luck would have it, there was a conference in the Azores followed by another one in Cape Town. So bugger it, I booked them into both. And off they went, and they came back like a spaniel. They came back waggy-tailed, wet-nosed, and they realized they could cut the mustard. And they then led Eden. It's fantastic. I don't know why I got there, actually.
I mean, come on, pick up from that. I guess listening to that, what I want to know is where have you seen proof that, you know, what you just said, that we can think our way out of this, that we can make this, you know, that we are this incredible species? Where are the sort of moments that you think, yes, that's one.
Gosh, where do I start? Well, we're building 3 Eden projects in China at the moment. Well, we started building one and we're going to build two others. When you meet people, Chinese people in their age group, 30 to 45, it is absolutely astonishing. These guys have got religion, but their religion is Taoism light. And they believe that President Xi is absolutely right. He has this mantra, heal the soil, it will heal our souls. We live in a very racist country that likes to look at other countries as letting the side down. You know, all those Chinese folks, you know, they're polluting the world. Why should we actually bother? Boy, they know that they have trashed their environment in their rush to development, but they knew that if they didn't develop, there would have been a revolution and that would be the end of China. So they had to do it, and they did it knowing that there would come a moment when they had to prove they were really smart and heal the environment. Get this for a statistic. In China, in the year 2015-16, the year 16-17, and the year 17-18, China planted more trees than in the rest of the world put together. Wherever you go in China, if you go by train from Qingdao, which is on the coast, the marine capital of China, all the way up to Beijing, up to Jinan, the top of Shandong province, that's about 350 miles, just nurseries. These guys are serious dudes. They are really serious, and they cannot believe how shocking our politicians are. They say, how is it possible that you allowed yourselves to elect people who said, let us not get with the environmental agenda, because what's the point with India and China emitting so much? What's happened? China is now the biggest producer of solar cells in the world. It is the biggest manufacturer of wind in the world, wind turbines in the world. And they are intending to be completely independent, off-grid, by 2035. These guys are very serious. And yet all you hear in the predominantly right-wing press in Britain is that China is building one new coal-fired power station every month. And in some newspapers it'll be every week. Yes, they are building a few coal-fired power stations, but when you see everything else going on and their knowledge about what's going wrong, it's amazing. But these guys also learned something, that war is really expensive. And what sort of idiots go to war? They looked at America and Britain going into Iraq and Afghanistan and then messing about in Libya and then doing a bit here and there with Syria, and they're going, how come, if we invest in railways and we pay people for land rather than invade it? You know, they spent 20 billion buying a port in North Pakistan. And you will have all heard of the Silk Road and Belt. They've spent something like $13 trillion already building roads, rail, pipes, grids of every description. While the rest of the world has no vision, they're saying, we're just going to get our global civilization back. We should be really depressed at our political class. No vision, no idea of a sunny horizon. And it's our duty, that's why something like this is really important, it's our duty to realise, A, the tossers who are in Parliament are no better than we are. They really are not. One of the greatest depressions of my life is to make it, and you go and you actually, you know, wow, I've made it, I'm going to meet some of these cool people who are running the country. And when you meet them, you go, you know what, I'd rather have some macaroni cheese at home. Honestly, it is so depressing to realise people are so craven, their snouts so into a trough, and even worse, it's just a plastic trough. No class.
So what does making it look like? And maybe the question is, does making it matter to you?
Making what?
Making it success.
No, not now, because now I'm an old fart. I've realised something I wish I'd known 50 years ago. And the thing I realised is magic comes from not wanting to own things. Seriously. And Eden has gone through a huge change over the last 18 months, 2 years, where we suddenly realised that part of our problem is that we wanted to own all the stories we were telling. We wanted to be the creators, largely, of it. And the truth is, we're far better at having this wonderful stage, standing back a little bit and asking other clever folks who are fellow travellers to come and help populate it. And that's only become sort of evident as we're working on 17 projects globally at the moment. I mean, massive, it's about just under 2 billion quid's worth of construction we're engaged in. And you realise that what a privilege that is, but what a waste if you think you've got to dominate it. And that is the thing I wished I'd known when I was a lot younger, that in fact, letting go is actually the strongest thing. I say to young colleagues who are starting in management, number one, always employ people smarter than you. Don't think that's a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength, because the people you've hired say, he's just not frightened, or she's not frightened, and that's actually really, really important. And the second thing I would say about that is the letting go is absolutely critical in terms of your own happiness, because once you've let go of the feeling that you have to populate it, and then you can use what your real skills are, which is to encourage other really smart people to join you. And that is the great irony, because that's how you built it in the first place. And by forgetting that, you were losing the essence of what it was. So I'm really glad we caught ourselves before a point of no return, becoming mediocre. Becoming mediocre is very easy. You can become mediocre so quickly, almost overnight. Yeah, believe me, I've done it.
Big story there. Is that still working?
Yeah. Why is this set to sort of like Cyrus C. Wildebeest setting on?
It's working. There's a nice sort of gravelly tones there. So, looking ahead, you know, you've answered that, you know, the success, does it matter to you? But in terms of where the Eden Project both here and in China, I think that's actually quite, it's a good reminder actually listening to you talking about, you know, outside of the, you know, where we are at the moment in Cornwall. And I guess in some ways, you know, there's a danger you can kind of live in a conservation bubble. But what is your vision for the Eden Project? Where would you like to see it in like 30 years, 50 years?
In 50 years, extinct. I would like us not to exist in many ways in terms of the reason we were set up. But
sorry, you mean the Eden Project over humans? just to clarify.
Oh, it's a close call. No. Can I answer the question elliptically? Last May, I became very friendly with a guy who was a cage-fighting drug addict who had woken up on the mortuary slab at Chicago Hospital. And he had a vision that he'd been brought back from death by the Archangel Michael, as you do. And anyway, I met him because I have a philosophy in life, which some people in the room may know, is I accept every third invitation I receive. And I do that because I want to always be in jeopardy of meeting the people I didn't know I needed to meet. And most people are so conservative, they only accept the invitations that they want to receive, which means that you will become boring. Believe me, you will become boring, and what happens is you will read the odd article in The Economist or some smart magazine and hope your mates haven't read it so that they think you're clever. No, you will. Real thinking requires work, and it hurts. And you need to put yourself in a position where you see things, hear things, taste things, meet people you wouldn't normally meet. Or else you've just got to fake that you're interesting. A really good way of testing this, ladies and gentlemen, imagine your friends and your family now, right? In one massive conflagration, I'm going to kill them all. Just now, boof. And you end up in heaven, all of you together. Now imagine eternity. And tell me meeting a few new people wouldn't be a good thing. I'm serious, I'm really serious. Almost all the great life-changing things that I've done in my life have come through accepting the third invitation. It doesn't mean you don't accept the first, but always accept the third. Anyway, I accepted this invitation to meet this guy called David Millarch. He was enormous, and he had this vision that he had to save the giant redwoods. And he'd gone back, made peace with his family with whom he'd fallen out, and they started to plant redwoods, and they started to propagate redwoods, which was thought to be impossible, the giants. And I met him in London. He came over, and I just got on a train and went up and I met him. He was teetotal. Met him in a pub, which seemed a bit ironic. And he said, "You gotta come with me. We're gonna climb a big tree together." Looking at the size of him, I was a bit worried about this tree. But anyway, so I went out to the Sierra Nevada mountains, and I said to my son, "I'm not sure I want to do this," because I took him with me. And he said, "Dad, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience." I said, "That's what I'm scared of." But anyway, I want to tell you about what happened. I discovered, number one, I was more scared of being thought a coward than I was scared of death. So eventually, everybody here who's ever tried fundraising by going on a parachute jump knows exactly what I mean. And so anyway, I ended up climbing this giant tree, which is 380 feet tall. It was honestly wider, its girth, wider than from where I'm sitting to the back of the room. That big, right? So you're going up on a rope this thick. Do you want to know how you climb a giant tree like that? You need a bow and arrow, a fishing line over the first branch, bring it down, tie a rope, tie it around, tie it to you, and then almost like one of those old railway things, you go jing, 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 and up you go. Easy. Well, it's really easy if you've got two really strong guys also at the top of the tree pulling, which is what happens. So anyway, I get to the top of this tree, or within about 70 feet of this tree. You look one way and you look across the Sierra Nevada mountains to a Sequoia National Park, just green as far as the eye can see. You just look 180 degrees that way and you see Death Valley. It's biblical. You're sweating. Your hands are on the bark of this tree. Now the bark of a giant sequoia, when you get to that height, is like the neck of an owl. But you know when you look at an owl, the feathers down the neck are they are so silky soft, they're beautifully put together. Whereas at the bottom of the tree, you can put your fist in the grooves. When you get to the top, it's silky. Now my hands are sweating, they're stuck to the owl's throat. Do you know what I think? I want to terrify you. What I think is this, I think I'm scared, but fuck me, this tree is 4,500 years old. I'm an archaeologist, that's how I was trained. And I'm thinking, I could name you 37 civilizations that began, peaked, and died in the time that this tree has been alive. So I'm thinking that's pretty profound. And then, well it is, isn't it? I mean, as profound goes, that's pretty good. But what happened next, I want to share with you. I got to the 37 civilizations, and then I thought, fuck, every one of those civilizations will have had an establishment. And everyone was wrong. Why is that interesting? We don't rebel enough. We have got this respect for our so-called betters in the knowledge that so far 37 civilizations mucked it up each time. So what makes you think that Donald Trump and Theresa May are going to get it right this time? You see where I'm going with this? Where I'm going with this is actually about us taking responsibility for the future and not actually thinking there's a whole bunch of people in charge. Because when you actually meet the people that you think are in charge, they think someone else is in charge. That is really scary. Well, you know, when we were young, well, all of you, probably you could be my children, I mean, in terms of age, and not really, to go back to the age, but when you, I've lost my thread, I completely, no, that's absolutely right. But the point is that when I was young, and when some of the other greybeards in this room were young, we were always taught, they will sort it. They will sort it. They. There was always a they over the horizon, wasn't there? Are you telling me that no one has spotted that they are dead? There is no they. The point of a conference like this is for everybody to wake up to realize there is no they. Oh fuck, it's us. So how are we going to have a society in which we take responsibility? As opposed to worrying about our rights, what are our responsibilities? What are we going to do? How are we going to aggregate? And this isn't about being left-wing or right-wing. It's about realizing that we're really smart creatures, but we're capable of such dumb decisions. Such dumb decisions. And I think the Extinction Rebellion action was very, very interesting. The wonderful hypocrisy that many of us show. What is great is, I said to my trustees at the Eden Project, I said, do you all believe climate science? That, you know, is true? And they all went, yes. Hands up, is there anybody who doesn't? I said, you climate denying fuckers. You're my trustees and none of you are behaving as if you believe it. You cannot believe it. You cannot really believe it if we're still acting the way we are. And it's the same for most of the people in this room. And before you think I'm getting holier than thou, same for me. But it's weird, isn't it? This denial. That I'm actually, in a sense, no different to Nigel Lawson. No, that's not a nice thought. But you know what I mean? That it doesn't matter what he actually says. When it comes down to actions, there's probably an awful lot that's left to be desired. And I thought I would share that thought with you about the civilizations that have come and gone, the fact that there's no one in charge, that new regimes are necessary, and we've got to organize ourselves differently, and we've also got to learn to stop being left-wing or right-wing. Don't let other people polarize us. One of my pet loves is to go up to my fellow environmentalists with a really puppy dog look, and I say, are you all against nuclear power? And they all go, oh, Mr. Environmentalist, yeah, we're so against nuclear power. And I say, are you against genetic modification? Oh, yes, sirree, Bob, we're against. And then I'm really horrid. I say, other than a mushroom cloud and some really cool people who were in the campaign for nuclear disarmament, what do you know about nuclear power? And there's this terrible silence. There's this kind of wriggling, you know, a bit like a child that needs to go to the loo. And it's the same with the whole discussion about genetic modification. So you say, you're against it, so you want to kill 10% of the human race. And they go, what do you mean? You say, interferon, it's a genetically modified drug. And are you telling me that if I can find a plant that can grow in salt, and we go to Bangladesh, where the cyclones move salt water across the paddy fields, that it's not worth looking if I can't take the gene that can protect a plant from salt and put it in rice? You think that's bad? And they go, no, we don't mean that. The point I'm trying to make is the world is grey, and everybody wants us to have a position. We must be for this, against that. We must be outraged about this. We must be angry about this. It's diabolical. Why can't we just agree that most people are nice? Most people just don't know everything. And some people belong to the wrong tribe, but they can't help it. I don't know why I said that, actually. But, where are we going with this conversation? I suddenly felt a bit like in your dreams, you suddenly wake up naked in front of you.
So how are we doing for time? I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to see if anyone else can get him to answer. No, I'm only joking. I love it. I do. So the question that, like I said, I've gone off script completely. But listening to you, is there a project? Is there something that you haven't done as yet that you think you should start, like tomorrow, right now, the second you walk out of here? Is there something that you haven't done that you want to do?
Well,
God, no, I'm really worried that I asked that question.
No, there are lots of things, and I'm going to avoid the question. Well, a lady I know has found a Phoenician shipwreck very near the Shipwreck Museum in Charlestown. I would love to end my life excavating a Phoenician shipwreck that's 1500 years before Christ. That's pretty cool. I used to be a wreck diver, so that's cool. So I'd like to do that. But I wanted to cheer you up. Do you mind if I cheer you up? In a very unusual way. You will not expect what I'm about to say. I love President Trump. I love that bastard in Hungary and his sidekick in Poland. I love the Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu. I love that so soft and cuddly guy in Brazil. Don't you? Do you want to tell you why you should love them? The reason you should love them is because of efflorescence. For those of you who know about trees, let me tell you that a tree in the year before it dies flowers as if the end of time was coming. The biggest flowering of a tree is the year before it dies. Now look at global politics in a new way. All this chauvinism and nationalism that is roiling up and depressing us and worrying us about whether the new right is going to take on the world. When you start thinking of it as the moment just before death of old systems, old thinking, we're living in a world in which we're increasingly genuinely global in our awareness of our effect and impact on each other. And I think this is what really pisses people off for whom nations and chauvinism matters. I think almost all of you in this room will live to see the most extraordinary time in the history of humankind. In 1969, I played at being a bit of a hippie. I was too young really, but I had a caftan coat. And I smoked a bit of dope and occasionally inhaled, that sort of thing. But we believe it. Do you remember there was this musical, Hair, the Age of Aquarius? We are all stardust. And people called hippies. And if you were a sensible, scientific type person, you were an idiot. You were the sort of people that gave knowledge a bad name. Do you know how exciting it is to be alive at the time that we are discovering that our microbiome, with its 3 trillion little microbes, and you've got them too, don't worry, don't feel left out, and our trees, with their mycorrhiza, the fungi, the wood wide web, they're the same family. We are living at a time when the hippie shit of we are stardust, the world of science has finally caught up to realise that all living things are pretty much the same. We are creatures, we are earthlings. How exciting is it to live at a time when we realise we are all part and parcel, the weft and weave of the natural world. The only thing that makes us think that we're different is our innate arrogance, which is something we find difficult to cope with. So when you ask me, I will answer the question, have I got a big idea? I haven't got a big idea. I think the big idea for all of us is to actually find a new way of telling the story about the future of life on Earth. It's not about how we're going to hell in a handcart. It's not the accountant's world of let's talk carbon. It's actually about, isn't it amazing that intellectually we've arrived at a point when we realise that we are one with the planet, and actually we as a species will deserve to shuffle off this mortal coil if we can't actually bring that into our consciousness. But I am really confident when I look at young people now. I promise not to talk about children and children's children. So please do put me to death immediately after this sentence. But it is so exciting to see youngsters and realise that they get it. They really get it. The generation that really have screwed it up so far have been mine. But if I was a spaceman coming down now, I'd say they're pretty good shape actually. They're pretty good shape because they know what's wrong. Part of the problem is that you don't know what's wrong, but now we know what's wrong, we can start with the treatment. So that's all I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone?
I tell you what, standing between an audience and a bar, my mother told me never to do that.
I call the shots. No, go on.
Thanks for the inspiring words, really interesting. I have to say that I feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of the things you say. We are quite a lot of relatively young people, and we're living at a time where British politics are where they are, and you described them quite well. Although I feel very uncomfortable with the bashing, generally bashing with politicians. We have a European election coming up within a month, and if people, including in this room, don't vote, Britain will be sending essentially right-wingers to the European Parliament. So I think if you could just address this issue of actually how young people could engage with politics and actually make some changes from the inside as well as perhaps from the outside, because I feel like some of this rhetoric can be very, very dangerous if it completely disengages us from the system, and I really worry that perhaps many of you haven't registered to vote, and that's going to make, I'm Swedish, but that's going to make Britain look really bad on the global stage.
Do you mean worse?
I didn't want to say it.
That's a good question.
No, that is a very good question. Look, I'm half Dutch and half English, hence my name, Smit. Brexit is a really confusing conversation because I think whatever it means to anybody, it doesn't really matter. It means that within our tribe, we have about half and half people disagreeing about their future. And actually messing around on the fringes about let's have another vote, or let's do this, or let's do that, does it actually matter? Because it means one side or the other is just going to feel fevered and betrayed. And we use those words, remember, betray, these words, treachery. What does that mean? Actually, about being disengaged with politics, I hate to say what I'm about to say, but I actually want, the very thing you are trying to guard me from is the very thing I want, because watching as a Dutch Englishman and hearing the piffle that is talked in Britain about democracy and how it is best represented, when you travel as much as I do, and you realise that in Britain we talk about the institutions we have and how good they are and all the rest of it, it's the past. It's the past. We are held trapped by dead institutions. Most young people today are paying lip service to the values of people that died long ago with far more respect than for people who are living now. So, I would like to see the collapse of the Conservatives and of Labour. They are so old-fashioned. I wouldn't say that if I had met any politicians that I didn't respect only for their quickness of wit. But I have not met any, and I met a lot, who have a vision of what our country could become. I just haven't. It is all bit part, chop, 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 a little initiative there to buy that, to do the other. You know, how is it possible 100 odd years after the first surveys into the difference between rich and poor, that the gap between rich and poor is bigger today than it was 100 years? It's just outrageous. And it shouldn't mean that we've got to be a Labour voter or a Conservative voter to be outraged just at our failure to galvanise our resources to make sure that wasn't so. So I hope for total political collapse and chaos. I hope that it angers the people in this room and all across rooms like this, across the country, to feel maybe it's our turn, maybe we should do stuff. I want it to be revealed quite how incompetent our political class is and quite how unbelievably embedded it is within the establishment, which is so bad for this country. I'm sorry, I was sent to an English public school against my wishes. So I know the shit that goes on amongst the privileged classes. They are not of us. It's not their fault. But their interests aren't the national interest. They are a far narrower interest, and we deserve better. I'm sorry if that is a nasty way of putting it, but that's what I believe.
So would you say, I mean, if there was the opportunity, let's say this collapse is happening, like, where do you start? Is there an opportunity there to have a blueprint, and what would that look like? You know, is that for you to say? Is that, you know, how does that work? Because sometimes, you know, just to pick up from that question, I do wonder whether, you know, our schools, whether, you know, any organisation, whether it's an NGO, a school, hospitals even, will set out a mission statement, a vision for the next 5 years or 10 years. But that doesn't seem to happen on a national level, certainly not on a global level, in any meaningful way anyway. So would you say that that's the point where the collapse has happened in your vision? And where's the blueprint? How would that come about?
I haven't got a blueprint, but I do know at least two things that I would do. If you were to ask me, one of the most dangerous things in this country is our belief in democracy. We've actually believed that a vote is democracy, as opposed to knowledge with which to have a vote. Which means that we, by and large, elect very ignorant people, because we believe in democracy, to be in our local councils, for example, running budgets the size of a multinational company. It is absolutely extraordinary. In Holland, right, if you get voted in to become a councillor, you have to go on training courses to understand money, to understand project management. In this country, we still bungle on the old amateur way, just like in the civil service in Whitehall. It'll do, I've got a good education, I've got philosophy and I've got English. I can do armed forces, it shouldn't be too difficult. But the truth is that educating and paying our democratically elected local councils would be a great start. Education is everything, honestly. And the second thing I would do is, and this is just because we're together as Cornish people in one room, I feel really strongly about auditors and the accounting profession. I feel that the big 4 accounting companies are huge traitors to the human race. I do, and I'm being serious. You notice I didn't do the smiley thing, right? Here we have a profession that protects corporate life without any concern for the common wealth. They've made no advances over the last 100 years to make sure that when you audit big companies, you take account of the public realm that is affected by it. If you created for just one small change in corporate law to make sure that every limited liability company had one golden share that belonged to the nation, it would mean that auditors would have to audit every company in the land to take account for how much they've polluted the air, the rivers, the soil, how badly they've treated their people. It's a really simple thing. And when you talk to senior guys, and they're always guys usually, they'll find all sorts of reasons why you're wrong, and then you push them, and then they say, well, it can never happen. You say, why? Because it's always been so. We've just got to get angry with it's always been so. It doesn't need to be so. And we could actually have a civilized, wonderful country doing stuff just a little bit differently and maybe start to address the poverty of the soil and the poverty of our people.
So I heard someone say recently that we're living in an era of imagination austerity, and you've got a lot of creative people in the room here today, and I wonder from your experience, how do you think we could be telling better stories of a more positive future? From your experience, how would you recommend we do that?
Don't flatter me. You all are doing that. I think the thing is that we shouldn't be feared of technology. I saw the best lecture I've ever seen in my life a few weeks ago in Edinburgh. These two PhD students were talking about artificial intelligence and described the positives of what they were talking about. And it was just, I haven't got time to tell you about it, but it was amazing about how actually in terms of looking after older people and being able to tell stories to children and being able to actually mediate all sorts of our problems, it was actually really inspiring. But going back to what sort of stories could you be telling, actually the stories that you want to be telling is how do you translate the nobility of your kitchen table, everybody's kitchen table, and the values you have at that kitchen table into the work that we do. How do we just make sure that the school in Truro has got this amazing motto, which is to be, not to seem to be. And I think provided we all did that, we'd be fine. I don't think there's that much wrong that actually just regaining the sort of moral high ground of just being kind and generous couldn't put right. Seriously. I think one of the things about social enterprises and any businesses, I would like to think that the standards we set ourselves for running anything are just good, that we understand this. When I was in the music industry, I used to lose my rag with other artists that I work with who used to say, hey man, I don't do money. You'd say, fuck you, who else is going to pick up the tab then? Because you are so vulnerable if you believe that business is what someone else does. Grow up. Read your pension form. You will hate it, but by God, by the time you've hated it and understood it, you will walk with a strange swagger. But running something really good is actually, if you do run it really good, you're creating jobs for other people. And you're creating also a thought process in other people about what good running is. I'd like to think that people who actually are ambitious, who are working in the public sector or are working in NGOs or community interest companies, are as good as the people running major corporations. I think it's inexcusable to want to forgive yourself the ability to be good simply because what you're doing has got a good ambition. And if you really, really want to feel sick in the stomach, go to one of those big charity conferences where you suddenly meet 35 people leading 35 different prison reform charities and 70 people who are interested in your kidneys. And most of them are spending all of their time raising enough money for their job, as opposed to being brave enough to say, why don't we all get together and do this stuff? I know this may not be music to a lot of you who are running kidney charities in this room, but my advice to you is if you want to be Cornish, remember Morgan Cars. Morgan Cars are a really interesting company. They have just sold themselves because they just couldn't be shagged to build cars anymore. But for years, they were told that lots of people wanted to put money into them and so they could grow, and Peter Morgan, who ran the company, said, I don't want to grow. I'm really happy. People are waiting for 7 years. So it's really interesting. People are waiting for 7 years for his car, and he's seeing this as a real good spot. And the people who are used to running business saying, this is terrible. But he was happy. So I'd much rather people waited 7 years and were happy with your company than that you actually could deliver tomorrow, but you were unhappy.
I loved how you were talking about the whole Eden project as an adventure, and how you said you created that culture of it being an adventure. So I was just wondering a bit more about what you meant by that, and practically how did you create that culture within the team to make it feel like an adventure in a building project?
Well, I feel as if I might be at risk of being struck by lightning, because no, the trouble is the hyperbole, the hype of how everything is an adventure at Eden. There are some days where it's bloody awful, and sometimes we mess up really badly, and sometimes the way we treat each other isn't as great. So please don't go away thinking we are the perfect thing. We're not. We try. On our good days, we have real great moments. On our bad days, I'm seeing a colleague in the front here, so I'm aware that I could be, tied to a stake if I get this wrong. But if we're talking about starting adventures, part of it is about gangmanship. I mean, the biggest change for me was that we started the Eden Project in a garden shed at Heligan, and then we upgraded. We got a garden shed at a nursery up the road, and I loved that stage where we went from like 4 people to 150 people in 6 months, but people gave up their jobs to come and work for us for nothing. And that period was terrific because there were not enough people to get into hierarchies. One of the things that really fucks things up is, especially men, when you create hierarchies. Because what you get, I just want to illustrate this, and I don't want to annoy anybody who really loves organograms. I mean, there are some people. But what happens very often is that people confuse techniques with a reason to be. So these days, if you've got a big company, you've got a chief executive, then a straight line to another straight line, the weighing scales that balance authority. Coming off as the sales director, the HR director, the finance director, the God knows what directors, and hanging off each one of those directors like grapes are the workers. Yeah, and authority goes dum 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 dum. Most people don't realise that that's not natural. That is not natural. In nature, we're creaturely, we're amoeba-like, we do stuff, this is like a Swiss clock. And I don't know any organisation I've ever come across, any organisation, anywhere, that operates well like that and the people are happy. I haven't, and I've been to lots of organisations. Eden's success, if that's the right way to put it, forgive me for using the word, but I can't think of another word, has largely come through breaking some of the rules. Like, I believe in hunting in packs. My chairman said to me, Tim, you're like a gang leader. You've got to get corporate governance in here. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, damn it, man, you haven't even got any KPIs. I said, what the fuck are they? So that's where we were at the start. I then wrote a management manual for the Eden Project called The Monkey Business, which was a few basic tips on how to open your mind and stuff, which were guidance rules, like rules are for the guidance of the wise and the enslavement of the stupid, as we all know. But I found the stupid thing is, like, going to China, take the whole gang, we go to China, and everybody says, what are you doing taking the whole gang to China? That's expensive. And I go, it's not nearly as expensive as me going to China, coming back, telling a whole lot of people what I saw in China. We then have a committee meeting about that, and then we send someone else back. We then start to discuss a deal. Then the marketing guy goes out, and then the finance director goes out. I said, and at no point were all of us in the same room. I said, if we all go at the same time, we see the same pair of eyes looking at us, and we say, do we trust them? We all go, yeah, we do the deal. Jesus, I mean, the amount of time people spend because they're so scared of making decisions to have committee meetings and blah, blah, blah. You know this. The nightmare I have is that people try to rope me into them. And I say horrible things like, please don't waste my life with yours. It's true. But have you all noticed this? Most people create committee meetings, the length of which is in direct inverse proportion to the importance of the subject that they believe is to be discussed. Yes? You would agree with that? Right. There is a vital thing that is missing. Because everybody is well-mannered, no one dares to say, I'm pretty damn clever, me. When was the last time you said, I'm pretty damn clever? Do you realise the damage you are doing to yourself by not saying, I'm pretty damn clever? Because I do not know any serious decision, other than medical, which takes longer than 20 minutes if you've got the right people, the right briefing, the right conversation. And with most of my colleagues, I say, would you like an hour-long meeting 5 working days from now, or would you like 5 minutes right now? And you know what? I'm pretty damn clever. And so are you. And you know what's happened? I have won back 55 minutes of my life. In that 55 minutes, I could read 2 chapters of a marvellous book. I could drink maybe 2, maybe 3 glasses of fine Chablis. I could, if I was feeling inspired and a bit younger, make love upside down on a hammock. But I'll tell you what I wouldn't be doing is having another 55 minutes of meeting.